Her evil mother-in-law planned her absolute downfall for 12 years. When Era married a feared mafia boss to get revenge on her cheating ex, she thought she was in control. But a secret envelope dropped in their high-security penthouse revealed a terrifying truth. The billionaire matriarch orchestrated Era's doomed engagement from the start, all because of a summer camp photo taken when Era was just 14 years old.
Today, you and I are going to examine a betrayal so profound it shatters the architecture of trust. Picture the opening shot. Era is trembling, not from fear, but from a vengeance so pure it demands a sacrifice. She rips the massive diamond from her finger, hurling it across the freezing marble. The stone skids, stopping at the feet of the one man the city fears. Lucien. Behind her, her fiancé Adrian stands paralyzed, wearing the damning evidence of her sister's lipstick on his collar. 300 guests hold their breath as Era meets Lucien's glacial stare and tells him to marry her. Right there, the lesson is written in ash. Sometimes, the only way to survive a devastating fire is to walk straight into the center of the flames. Let us rewind the film and examine the architecture of this tragedy at the Beaumont estate. The ballroom itself was built to diminish the human spirit. Imagine 40-foot ceilings and a crystal chandelier suspended like frozen starlight. 300 elites are packed into tailored velvet, raising glasses to toast the golden couple. Yet, by the champagne fountain, the camera pushes in on Era. She grips her glass, a hand pressed tight to her stomach to suppress a rising wave of panic. Her mother glides past with a hollow smile, offering empty praise. It leaves us with a bitter reality check. The image of absolute, breathtaking perfection is almost always just a very expensive, deeply exhausting illusion meant to hide the rotting wood beneath. Do not drink too much, her mother warns, the words slicing through the warm jazz like a steel blade. I am fine, Era replies, the defense entirely automatic. But her mother presses the attack, demanding the whereabouts of Cleo, the younger sister who vanished during cocktail hour. Era gives a dismissive shake of her head, but receives a strict command to hunt her down for a portrait. As her mother dissolves into the sea of wealth, Era is left alone with a gnawing ache in her chest. For months, Cleo had been slipping away, leaving behind a trail of quiet absences. Era blamed it on simple jealousy. But here is a heavy truth. We almost always ignore the most massive, blazing red flags when they are held by the very people we love the most. Yet, on the most significant night of her existence, her own flesh and blood had not even bothered to offer a simple greeting. Era stops a passing waiter, asking if he has seen a young woman wearing an emerald green dress. He points toward the heavy shadows of the east wing. Abandoning her glass, Era slips out of the suffocating heat of the ballroom, stepping into the tragic role she has played her entire life. She is the ultimate fixer. She intends to locate her sister, smooth over the unspoken tension, and drag her back into the blinding flash of the cameras. But the role of the endless peacemaker always demands a brutal, unseen price. In your desperate, unyielding rush to fix the broken people around you, you almost inevitably end up completely shattering your own soul in the process. The East Wing feels suffocatingly quiet, a stark contrast to the chaotic joy behind her. The orchestral swell fades into a distant hum as Era moves down a dim corridor, flanked by the painted stairs of long-dead ancestors. At the end of the hall, a heavy oak door stands slightly ajar, spilling a thin sliver of yellow light onto the carpet, and then Era hears it, a soft, breathless laugh. It is undeniably her sister. But the true horror follows immediately, a low, intimately familiar whisper belonging to the man she is supposed to marry. Adrian. Era does not scream. She whispers his name like a ghost, pushing the heavy door open as her entire universe collapses. The hardest truth of human existence is that the quietest sounds often destroy our worlds the most. The camera locks onto Adrian, anchored to the spot. His hands grip Cleo tightly, his mouth pressed against her neck in the shadows. The tailored jacket Era spent hours helping him select is carelessly draped over a velvet chair. For 3 agonizing seconds, the rotation of the earth simply stops. Then Cleo opens her eyes and meets the devastated gaze of her older sister. The sound escaping her throat is no apology. It is a sharp intake of breath, followed by a sick, nervous giggle of profound guilt. Adrian trips over his own feet, stumbling backward in a pathetic display of cowardice. A smear of bright red lipstick damns him on the jawline. Listen closely to this absolute certainty. Your worst enemies can never truly destroy you. Only those you trust blindly possess the map to your heart. This is the precise cinematic frame where the foundation crumbles. The heavy door stands open, casting long shadows as panic floods Adrian's guilty eyes. He actually summons the nerve to stammer out that pathetic cliché, claiming it is not what it looks like. Era cuts him down with a razor-sharp whisper, her voice dropping as she warns him not to finish that insulting sentence. Behind him, her sister frantically tugs at the emerald silk, smoothing her hair as if a neat appearance might reverse time. Cleo begins to plead, weeping that the situation is complicated. Era snaps back with the deadly precision of a loaded gun, demanding the truth. Life has a harsh way of teaching us that the deepest, most fatal wounds are always inflicted by the ones we let past our ultimate defenses. Adrian drags a trembling hand down his pale face, the stage lights of his false persona burning out, and delivers the fatal blow. 8 months. He confesses they have been sharing this dark secret for 8 long months. Era feels her knees threaten to give way, but sheer willpower keeps her spine straight. She echoes the time frame out loud, performing the agonizing emotional calculus. He had proposed to her while her own sister's perfume was likely still lingering on his skin. She demands to know if the grand wedding plans and the diamond ring were just a twisted theater production to cover their sins. He desperately swears his love is real. But let me tell you a fundamental truth. Any future built upon a foundation of hidden betrayal is guaranteed to rot from the inside out. He possesses the sheer audacity to continue pleading, swearing against all logic that his feelings for her are genuine. Era simply raises a trembling hand, radiating absolute disgust, and commands him to never speak that sacred word in her presence again. Then she slowly pivots her gaze toward Cleo. The camera lingers on this painful transition. This is not a stranger in a crowded room. This is her younger sister, the child whose hair she used to braid, the woman chosen to stand beside her as the maid of honor. Era looks at the girl she spent a lifetime protecting, letting the silence stretch until it becomes physically unbearable. The lesson we learn in these quiet, devastating moments is that the cruelest daggers are always forged in the warm fires of our shared history. Picture the psychology of this absolute wreckage. Cleo is weeping openly, hiding behind the pathetic excuse that they simply could not control their sudden desires. Era lets out a hollow, metallic laugh that contains zero warmth. She weaponizes her sarcasm, offering a mock apology that their deception was so terribly inconvenient for them. Then the fire in her eyes turns to glacial ice. She reminds them of the reality waiting below. 300 powerful guests, including senators and the ruthless press, are eagerly waiting downstairs. Adrian loses all color, his expensive facade crumbling into pure terror. Era points a single finger, commanding them to stay in that room. The life lesson here is profound. True power is never found in screaming. It lives in that terrifying calm right before the storm. The betrayers are still begging for mercy, but Era has already crossed the psychological threshold. She drifts down the grand hallway in a state of cinematic shock, coming to a dead stop at the pinnacle of the curving marble staircase. Below her, 300 oblivious socialites are drinking and laughing, unaware they are about to witness her public execution. A very human instinct urges her to flee out the back door and vanish into the night. You and I have probably both felt that exact urge to hide when the pain becomes too heavy to carry. Running often feels like the only logical escape from ruin. But a fierce ancestral pride within her refuses to let her fade into the shadows. At that exact moment, her blurred vision locks onto a solitary figure standing completely still by the far wall. We must now examine the true catalyst of this narrative. Lucien Beaumont. This is Adrian's older brother, the exiled heir to the family dynasty. He skipped the formal dinner entirely, arriving late in a pitch-black suit, projecting the aura of a starving wolf analyzing a weak fence. He was pushed out of the syndicate years ago because he refused to bow to their toxic control. Era had been instructed to pretend this dangerous man did not even exist. But observe this vital life lesson. The very outcasts that high society desperately tries to ignore are almost always the ones who perceive the truth with the most absolute clarity. Right now, Lucien stares directly up at the balcony, holding Era's gaze with the terrifying intensity of a man who sees her entire world burning to ash. Let us step into this scene together. The psychology of what happens next is a devastating study in human fracture. Era begins her descent, practically sleepwalking into the roaring inferno of the ballroom. The room's atmosphere plummets. The string quartet falters into an agonizing silence. Watch how the wealthy crowd intuitively splits, parting like a dark sea to avoid the blast radius of her tragedy. She marches straight toward Lucien Beaumont. Notice the jagged scar slicing his eyebrow, undeniable proof of his harsh survival. He does not flinch. His cold, grey eyes anchor her, projecting a terrifying knowingness. It teaches us a haunting lesson. Sometimes the heaviest choices we make are not calculated, but driven by feet, desperate enough to cross the point of no return. Picture the scene. Eras stands trembling under the crushing weight of 300 guests, their stares digging into her spine. Lucien observes her from the shadows, utterly quiet. The opulent room plunges into a heavy silence. Taking a jagged breath, she unleashes absolute devastation, demanding that he marry her this very second. Lucien remains motionless, yet a pitch-black shadow flickers across his gaze, the chilling hunger of a predator smelling fresh blood. She amplifies her voice, insisting he do it before the paralyzed crowd. Somewhere, a crystal glass shatters. He slowly asks if she comprehends who he really is. She holds his stare, confirming her choice. We must realize that the most treacherous paths we walk are often the ones we choose with our eyes wide open. Lucien ignores the murmurs, his dark gaze drifting past Era to the grand staircase. He focuses on the walking disaster that is his brother, Adrian. The man stumbles into the light, looking disgraced, his shirt untucked, a stranger's lipstick smeared across his collar. Watching this, a calculating smirk stretches across Lucien's hardened face. It is the look of a man handed the exact weapon he has spent his life hunting. He leans in, quietly asking Era if she has thought this through. She bluntly replies she considered it for exactly 4 minutes. He notes the brevity, but she fiercely counters they were the longest 4 minutes of her existence. This reveals a profound truth. Agonizing heartbreak possesses a cruel ability to completely distort our perception of time. Era shocks even herself as she lays bare the unvarnished truth. She tells him he is her choice because he is the only man in this twisted family who cannot be bought. The camera lingers on her desperate eyes as she points out the brutal facts. He despises his brother, his mother hates him, and without a husband in 10 minutes, her life is ash. Lucien enjoys this raw honesty, his dark smile widening. He whispers that she is ruthless. She fires back that she is simply doing what is necessary. Stepping close enough to catch the sharp scent of rich whiskey on his breath, she promises him the chance to destroy his cheating brother permanently. We must remember this harsh reality. Pure anger will always push you to build bridges with the very demons you were once warned to avoid. She meets his gaze and declares their arrangement begins tonight. Lucien studies her face for a heavy moment before extending his scarred hand. "Done," he says smoothly. Suddenly, an enraged scream tears through the room. It is Adrian. He violently shoves his way past the stunned socialites, his face pale with panic. He screams at his brother to get his hands off her. A pathetic irony, since Lucien has not even touched her. Lucien tilts his head, mocking his brother's distress. Panic consumes the cheating ex as he begs to leave Era, insisting she is just in shock. She shuts him down with freezing clarity, stating she means every single word. He foolishly claims they can still fix things. Betrayal is insidious like that. It always tries to desperately convince you that your own two eyes are lying to you. Adrian pleads for privacy, begging her not to do anything crazy. The word triggers a bitter laugh from Era. She raises her voice, demanding to know where Cleo is. Yes, her own sister. She challenges Adrian to drag Cleo down so they can discuss his infidelity before 300 witnesses. The color drains from his face as he weakly whispers for her to stop. She coldly replies, he is far too late. Turning her back on him, Era presents her bare left hand to Lucien. Her old diamond is already tossed aside like garbage. She boldly asks if he has a ring. Lucien immediately produces a heavy gold Beaumont family crest. Let us look at this together. We rarely realize how fast a supposedly great love can turn to pure ash until the cold wind finally starts blowing. Lucien delivers a devastating blow, his voice dropping to a low rumble. He confesses he has carried this ring for 9 years, waiting for this moment. He slides this heavy metal onto her finger. It is too large, forcing her to curl her hand into a tight fist to anchor it. Adrian loses his mind and lunges at them, yet Lucien remains still. From the shadows, a man in a grey suit steps forward, blocking Adrian's path with absolute authority. Lucien smirks, reminding his brother that the state attorney general is standing right there. Adrian freezes. His eyes dart like a trapped rat as dozens of cell phones record his ruin. He then spots his mother, Margot, looking utterly ghostly. It is a universal truth. A cornered man will always search for his mother when the fragile architecture of his lies finally collapses. Margot Beaumont stands at the perimeter, her champagne glass frozen midway to her lips. Her fierce glare locks onto that gold ring. It is the artifact she explicitly ordered, destroyed 9 years prior. She hisses her son's name, venomously demanding a word. Lucien dismisses her with chilling indifference. Ignoring her toxic presence, he turns to Era and gently takes her arm. Treating her as though she were crafted from fragile glass, he softly asks if she is ready to depart. Era is more than ready. As Margot loses her composure and shrieks his name, Lucien simply tosses a sarcastic farewell over his shoulder. The crowd of elite guests splits down the center, parting for them like a dark sea. We must remember this lesson together. True power never begs for attention, it simply commands the space it occupies. Let us observe this spectacle together. The ballroom descends into beautiful chaos. Someone is openly weeping, another cackles with manic delight, and phone cameras flash like rapid gunfire. Era refuses to give the circling vultures her attention, keeping her gaze locked on the exit doors. But at the threshold, she permits herself one final glance backward. The framing is a masterpiece of ruin. Her cheating ex is sobbing on his knees against the marble. His mother is hysterically screaming at the musicians to play something, and there stands Cleo, the treacherous sister, weeping at the top of the stairs as thick mascara ruins her face. Era absorbs every drop of that bitter cocktail. Rock bottom is an agonizing place to visit, but it provides a solid foundation to build your ultimate resilience upon. Amidst that crushing atmosphere, a profound realization washes over Era. For the first time in her polite life, she feels completely untethered and dangerous. Stepping into the shadows, Lucian addresses her formally as Miss Callahan. She stops him, her voice holding firm. She tells him her name is Era, making it clear that if she is his wife, he will address her directly. The calculated lines of his face visibly shift. It is not warmth, as this man operates with icy detachment, but rather a spark of mutual respect between two apex predators. He softly agrees, testing her name before leading her into the dark. The massive estate doors slam shut behind them with the absolute finality of a heavy vault. It is a vital reminder. The most significant doors in our lives are always the ones we bravely choose to close for good. Era has no comprehension of the catastrophic hurricane she just unleashed. Sliding into the plush leather of Lucian's black sedan, her only anchor is the cold bite of that oversized gold crest digging into her palm. The blurred neon lights of the passing cityscape wash over her exhausted features. She has chained herself to a dangerous enforcer to orchestrate the ruin of the man who broke her heart. Yet, she refuses to harbor a single ounce of guilt. She is finished making apologies for other people's sins. They are barely 5 minutes down the highway when her clutch begins to vibrate aggressively. It buzzes with the desperate energy of a trapped hornet. She slowly retrieves the phone. Stick with me here. We spend so much of our existence fleeing from conflict, completely forgetting how deeply empowering a spark of controlled chaos can truly be. The harsh glare of the phone screen cuts through the darkness of the sedan, painting Era in the cold light of 47G's missed calls. Adrian is begging into the void. She stares at the digital panic, then turns the glass face down against her heavy velvet dress. Silence returns. Across the leather seat, Lucian remains a statue of terrifying poise, the amber whiskey catching the streetlights as he swirls it. He warns her the confrontation is inevitable. Not tonight, she breathes. He nods, stating they are going to his apartment. A shattered, hollow sound escapes Era, half laugh and half sob, as she confesses she cannot remember what day it is. You and I have to recognize this heavy truth together. Severe trauma possesses a ruthless ability to steal our very anchor to time. Shadows slip across Lucian as he checks the heavy silver watch on his wrist. He breaks the quiet, his voice a low hum against the engine, noting they are exactly 1 hour into their fake marriage. Then he drops the anvil. It is not legally binding. Era jerks her head up, demanding an answer. He smoothly dismantles her illusion, calling the ballroom stunt beautiful, brutal theater, but utterly useless in the eyes of the law. Era closes her eyes as a massive, ragged sigh escapes her chest. She admits the rage blinded her. You and I have probably both felt that reckless fire where you strike the match without checking the wind. Raw anger makes us do wild things. Lucian finishes her thought with clinical precision. She just wanted to burn her cheating fiancé to the ground and force him to choke on the ashes. A slow, devastating smirk shifts the shadows on his face. Lucian asks if she also wanted his toxic mother to suffer a public meltdown. Era slumps against the door, drained, admitting he is right. He hands her the ultimate validation. She achieved all of it. The mother-in-law suffered her first humiliation in 30 years. Her former fiancé torched his own social standing, and Era walked away a legend. By Monday, the city will feast on her name. Era whispers her dread of that spotlight, but Lucian leans in, his eyes gleaming. He calls the spotlight a weapon if she learns to swing it. Here is the tragic reality. We are usually terrified of our own power, right up until survival forces our hand. The dark sedan glides down the lonely black highway, carrying them toward the absolute unknown. The car descends into a concrete bunker where billionaire secrets hide behind unmarked steel. Lucian cuts the engine. Era remains entirely frozen, the adrenaline finally leaving her veins. His voice stays low, an anchor in the flood of her panic, noting she is in shock. He offers his hand, and her trembling fingers find his. They step into an elevator that demands a fingerprint and a code, shooting them upward into a silent penthouse floating in the clouds. A solitary grand piano sits lost against a wall of old books. Era ignores the luxury, walking straight to the massive windows and pressing her bare palms against the freezing glass. It brings up a quiet, painful truth. Sometimes the clearest, most beautiful glass only serves to show us exactly how trapped we really are in our own desperate choices. Panic claws its way up her throat. Era paces the expensive floors, whispering frantically that her mother will disown her. Lucian does not even blink. He explains that her mother will be furious for exactly 6 weeks. But the moment she realizes Era secured a massive fortune, her morals will magically adjust. It is the hollow tragedy of opportunists. Then he casually drops the blade, mentioning her father is likely begging lawyers to save a secret corporate merger. Era stops dead. She stares at him, horrified, asking how he could possibly know that. His expression goes perfectly flat as he states he knows every deal his family touches. Let this be a harsh lesson. The quietest players standing in the shadows of the room are always the ones holding the sharpest knives. A violent shiver wrecks her frame. Her voice barely a whisper. Era asks if he has been watching her family this entire time. Lucian corrects her with one heavy, suffocating word. He has been waiting. The sheer gravity of his tone raises the hair on her arms. She demands to know what he meant in the car about carrying that ring for 9 empty years. He sinks onto the leather sofa, letting the crushing silence stretch until the air feels too thin to breathe. Then he rips the wound open. At 24, he was primed to take the syndicate. Then his father died. 2 weeks later, his own mother locked him out and handed the empire to Adrian, a boy with nothing but arrogance. It is a devastating reality of life. Nothing destroys the human soul quite like a knife driven into your back by the exact hands that were meant to protect you. Era shakes her head, the pieces refusing to fit. She asks why a mother would ever be so ruthless to her own son. Lucian goes utterly cold. He explains his singular crime was refusing to be her puppet. She demanded he fabricate $400 million in phantom earnings. Era feels her breath catch, whispering that he is describing massive federal fraud. He does not blink, confirming Adrian blindly signed every toxic paper their mother pushed across the desk. The rot has been spreading since his father was buried. Era feels her knees give out. She collapses to the rug, paralyzed by a sickening truth. If her father merges with this syndicate, her entire family burns. Let this be a terrifying life lesson. The hidden sins of the greedy will always return to collect their brutal payment from the innocent. Lucian delivers a hard, unforgiving confirmation to her worst fears. Era buries her face in her trembling hands, completely unspooled, while the neon city bleeds quietly through the glass 30 floors below. She desperately asks why he never went to the police. He explains his mother operates like a cartel boss. Every time he got close, witnesses vanished. Evidence turned to ash in sudden fires. Society labeled him insane. Until Era proposed, he had zero access to the inner circle. Era snaps her head up, accusing him of using her as a pawn. He leans forward, his voice like gravel, reminding her she used him first in front of 300 guests. It is a bitter lesson to swallow in life. Sometimes the knight in shining armor is secretly using his sword to fight a ruthless, bloody war of his own. He tells her to stop pretending either of them are innocent victims in this game of chess. A fractured sound escapes Era, bordering on a laugh, because he makes an agonizingly solid point. Pulling her knees tight to her chest, she finally dares to ask the terrifying question. Is he going to hurt her? Lucian sets his crystal glass down with a slow, deliberate click that echoes through the room. He meets her tear-filled eyes and simply says no. She searches his face, asking if it is truly that simple. His voice drops into a dark rumble, swearing to never lie or hide the gruesome truths of his world. He confesses he is not a warm man, but he will never break her. Look closely at this paradox of the human heart. A cold, ironclad vow of loyalty from a dangerous man will always be worth more than the hollow promises of a coward. Era pulls a shaky breath into her lungs, noting that is a terrifying amount of promises from a man she met 90 minutes ago. Lucian sits there with frost in his veins. He calmly replies that they were married 90 minutes ago, and promises are exactly the point. Suddenly, her phone erupts on the table. It is Cleo, the sister who drove the knife into her back. Without a single twitch of hesitation, Era permanently blocks the number. It is a savage act of severance. Lucian gestures toward a hallway, offering a guest room stocked with fresh clothing. When she questions why a solitary man keeps women's clothes, the shadows in his eyes deepen. They belong to a sister he no longer speaks to. The tragedy here is profoundly human. Sometimes holding on to the ghost of someone still breathing hurts far more than burying the dead. Lucian slowly unpacks the lingering ghosts of his past. The clothes belong to Ivy, his half-sister from a previous life. She lives quietly in Boston as a doctor, entirely severed from this suffocating mobster war. Then, he delivers a reality check that shatters the room. He looks directly at Era and states she is not his captive. She can walk out the doors at dawn, claim the wedding was a manic publicity stunt, and he will back her story. She can even keep the massive diamond and the wired funds. But here is the agonizing twist of her fate. Stick with me, because you and I must understand this final truth together. Total freedom feels paralyzing when you finally realize your comfortable life was actually a gilded cage. Sometimes the most terrifying act of bravery is to simply choose yourself and walk away from the poison forever. Let the camera linger on Era as she studies this monolith of a man. The harsh light catches the faded scars on his skin, emphasizing the terrifying, dead, still energy he carries. She asks what happens to his grand design if she simply walks out. He does not blink, stating he will just do what he has done for 9 years. Wait. You and I can see the exact frame where she finds her spine in the ruins. She refuses to let her toxic ex, her venomous sister, or her ruthless mother win. She stays, but under her own rules. First, absolute honesty, no gentle lies to shield her heart. Second, separate rooms to survive the whiplash of tonight. True power is born in the ashes of betrayal, teaching us that real respect begins the moment you finally draw a firm line in the sand. The lens tightens on Era as she lays down the third rule. Any dark secret he unearths about her family must go directly to her before the lawyers or press touch it. She demands the right to handle her own blood. A shadow of hesitations crosses the calculated man's face. He leans in, his voice like gravel, warning that if her father faces arrest, he will not casually discuss it over morning toast. He will strike instantly, briefing her while the ashes fall around them. It is a brutal, undeniable pragmatism. Era swallows her pride and agrees, commanding him to never shield her from the truth again. We all eventually learn this heavy truth. The strongest boundaries we set are the ones that force us to face our darkest realities, stripping away every comforting illusion. Era delivers the fourth rule, the room's tension suffocating. They must make this marriage legally binding before the week bleeds out. Lucian looks genuinely shaken for a rare second, but Era knows the cold mechanics of her mother's cruelty. If given a single breath, that woman will buy a judge and burn them to the ground. The trap must snap shut now. Lucian leans back in his heavy chair. You and I can see the dark admiration blooming in his gaze. He whispers that she is genuinely dangerous. She waves it away, citing sheer exhaustion, but the tragic truth is painted on her pale face. Let us look at this piece by piece together. The most terrifying thing a human being can do is realize they have nothing left to lose. Stripped of fear, a broken person becomes an unstoppable force. Era drags her leaden feet toward the bedroom, but the low timbre of Lucian's voice stops her cold. He speaks with agonizing caution, like a man dismantling a bomb in the dark. He delivers the tragic truth she needs. Tonight's brutal betrayal does not measure her worth. She did not overlook some massive red flag, nor did her love fall short. Some souls, he murmurs, are simply born shattered from the inside out. When gravity pulls them under, they drag whoever stands closest into the abyss. Era freezes in the doorway, her frame trembling, entirely unable to turn and meet his eyes. It is a devastating human truth. When your entire universe is reduced to ash by the very people you loved most, sheer, stubborn pride becomes the absolute last shield you can raise against the dark. Today, you and I are going to unpack this psychological wreckage together. Era whispers a fragile gratitude, carrying her shattered heart into the guest room and closing the heavy oak door. She presses a thick pillow over her face and screams. It is a raw, violent purge of grief that leaves her hollowed out, plunging her into an 11-hour sleep. She wakes to the sound of heavy rain battering the city windows. Her phone sits on the nightstand like an unexploded grenade, flashing 200 missed calls. Bypassing the chaos, she opens one solitary message sent at dawn. It simply reads, "Do not read the news." It reveals a dark, universal truth. The exact second someone warns you to look away is the precise moment the true psychological warfare actually begins. Watch the panic rise as the solid ground vanishes beneath Era's feet. A warning to avoid the news is a death sentence to the life she knew. Shivering in the chill, she pulls a sweater over her shoulders and creeps barefoot down the shadowed hallway. She discovers Lucian cast in the grey morning light. He leans against the marble counter, gripping his phone tight enough to shatter the glass. His voice is a dangerous rumble as he barks ruthless commands, threatening a fatal ethics complaint to the Bar Association. The true tragedy is that the target of his wrath is his own mother. It forces us to swallow a bitter pill. Unconditional family loyalty evaporates the second toxic power enters the room. We must always protect our own peace, even if it means completely severing ties with blood. For one cinematic heartbeat, the untouchable boss looks rattled. If Lucian were an ordinary man, you would call that shadow across his eyes pure regret. Era barely steadies, her trembling voice begging to know what horror unfolded while she slept. Lucian places his phone onto the cold marble with the crushing finality of a judge dropping a gavel. Slowly, he maps out the nightmare. Last night, his mother contacted Era's mother, who then dragged her father and an ex-lover into the conspiracy. It is a perfectly choreographed symphony of betrayal. By 2 a.m, her sister Cleo was giving a weeping, devastating interview to the press. We all must accept a brutal truth. Sometimes the deepest, most fatal wounds are dealt directly by the exact hands we once held for comfort. Let us look at this digital nightmare together, shall we? The glowing tablet radiates toxicity in the dim kitchen. The vicious headline burns across every platform. My sister stole my life. Cleo breaks her silence. Era physically stops breathing. The suffocating scale of this betrayal wraps around her throat like an iron vice. She whispers a desperate denial, but Lucian gently commands her to keep reading. He knows she must intimately understand the enemy she is fighting. Her terrified eyes dart across the venomous text. Cleo actually claims the engagement to Adrian was a total fake, sobbing out a fabricated tale of loving him since college. This leaves us with a vital truth. Deep envy is a creeping poison, guaranteed to completely destroy any family from the inside out. The fabricated article delivers one devastating blow after another. Cleo's the press that Adrian tried to escape months ago, only to be trapped by Era's alleged threats of self-harm. Horrified, Era gasps, her voice breaking as she denies the sick lie. The text paints her as deeply unstable, twisting her bold proposal into a public mental breakdown. Era's hands go numb, the heavy tablet clattering loudly against the cold stone. She up, shattered, begging to know why her own flesh and blood would orchestrate this massacre. Lucian does not flinch from the cold truth. Cleo is terrified, knowing she painted a target on her back. It is a heartbreaking reality we must face. Unchecked guilt and absolute fear quickly mutate the people we love into unrecognizable monsters. It is heavy to watch a person realize the walls have closed in. Leaning forward, the shadows catching his sharp jaw, Lucian dissects the enemy's survival strategy. The Beaumonts know their only escape is painting Era as the unhinged villain. By Monday, half the city will brand her a violently jealous sibling. But here is the dark twist. The other half will not buy the lie because the math does not add up. Era's brow furrows, demanding an explanation. Lucian drops the final bomb. Exactly 46 minutes after they fled the ballroom, someone quietly wired $800,000 from his mother's hidden account directly to the Caymans. It reveals a timeless lesson we must never forget. When lies surround you, always follow the money, for that is exactly where the truth is buried. Stick with me. This is where the cinematography of this deception gets incredibly dark. Lucian's voice slices through the kitchen, silence like a sharpened blade. He explains their enemies are systematically framing her for the fall. They are forging a paper trail, creating the illusion that Era accepted dirty Beaumont money for 2 years, using her failed engagement as a calculated cover. The camera lingers on Era, speechless, choking on her own breath. Lucian brings the final hammer down. Within a week, they will have forged documents, bribed witnesses, and a crooked federal agent ready to lock her in a cage. This forces a chilling realization about human nature. Often, the very people smiling the brightest in your face are the exact ones meticulously digging your grave in the dark. Lucian's demeanor turns to pure ice as he maps out the worst-case scenario. They fully intend to bury her in a prison cell. We watch Era grip the edge of the marble counter, her knuckles turning bloodless white. But instead of crumbling, a terrifying fire ignites within her eyes. She meets his dark gaze and declares they will stop them. When Lucian issues a warning, she cuts him off with lethal precision. She reminds him he waited 9 agonizing years for his revenge, and today she is matching his ruthless energy. If they demand a brutal mafia war, she is ready. If they want a villain, she will play the role flawlessly. It teaches us a profound life lesson. Total betrayal does not have to break your spirit. When channeled with pure focus, it can forge you into the exact weapon required to survive the darkness. The harsh penthouse lighting catches the dangerous, genuine smile breaking across the boss's face. He calls her Mrs. Beaumont, the syllables dripping with heavy, unvarnished respect, promising they will survive this night. Era wastes no time. Her phone screen flashes wildly with toxic messages from her bloodline, but her trembling fingers dial just one number, Nadia. Era orders her to grab the heavy camera gear for a live broadcast. 42 minutes later, Nadia marches through the heavy oak doors, her posture rigid like a soldier stepping onto a blood-soaked battlefield. It is a striking visual of a simple truth. When your entire world burns down to ash, the true friends are the ones who arrive fully armed. Never bothering to ask why the fire started, the camera pushes tight on Era as she builds a wall of pure ice. She snaps a hand up, forbidding Nadia from moving in for an embrace. 1 ounce of soft human warmth, and Ira knows her tears will betray her. Revenge affords no luxury for weeping. Nadia nods, retreating to the shadows. Across the dim room, Lucian leans against the cold marble island. His sleeves are rolled tight, his deep voice ruthlessly dismantling someone on the phone. He gives Nadia a smooth wave without breaking his dark rhythm. Nadia grins, urging Era to claim him. Era coldly threatens to throw her out if the heavy studio lights are not rigged instantly. It is a harsh reality. Sometimes you must completely block out the beautiful distractions to stay fiercely focused on winning the war. You and I are going to look at this together and witness the birth of true justice. We frame the scene inside a sprawling, shadowy library. Nadia throws her hands up in surrender, but the air around her is electric with military precision. Having survived combat tours before shooting films, her every movement is sharp. The metallic click of the camera rig suddenly grounds Era. For the first time in 12 agonizing hours, her shallow breathing slows. Nadia twists the heavy lens into sharp focus, asking for the angle. Era stares into the glass, stating she wants to burn down every lie. Nadia freezes, warning her that the internet is a permanent graveyard. It is a heavy truth of human conflict. Words are loaded bullets, and once the trigger is pulled, they can never be unsaid. Era goes dead silent, the lighting casting sharp shadows across her face. Her mind narrows to a razor edge. She wants to watch the whole world burn, to drag her sister and Adrian out for their 8 months of vicious deceit. She refuses to fade into the background like a wounded animal, but Lucian steps into the frame and stops her cold. He pulls her into the suffocating gloom of the hallway, shutting the heavy oak door. His voice drops to a lethal whisper. Name the sister, and a massive lawsuit ruins her. Expose the fiancé, and his lawyers bury her by dawn. It is a tragic but essential lesson for the wounded heart. Moving on blind, screaming anger only hands your enemies the exact weapon they need to end you. Real survival demands terrifying, cold patience. Panic tightens Era's chest. She grabs his sleeve, begging him for the script. Lucian does not flinch. The overhead light catches his unnervingly calm expression. He orders her to drop the legal facts and bleed on the lens. He wants the world to see her hands tremble, to hear her breath catch. If the public witnesses a shattered woman destroyed by her sister and lover, they will become her army. He orders her not to act, but simply to let the iron armor fall. Era whispers that his tactical mind terrifies her. Lucian looks away, his jaw clenching as he admits he learned it by watching his mother endure a 30-year nightmare. It is a heartbreaking reality. Our most powerful survival instincts are almost always carved out of our deepest childhood trauma. They step back into the suffocating quiet of the library. A single red recording light blinks out from the darkness. For 12 grueling hours, Era maintained a fortress of ice around her heart. But now she lets the walls crash down. She paints the scene for the lens, the heavy mahogany desk, the violent slash of red lipstick on Adrian's collar. A jagged sob rips from her throat as she recalls her own sister giggling in the aftermath. Then she mentions the funeral and the fake emergency exactly 8 months ago. The brutal realization hits her in real time, captured forever in high definition. Dropping your heavy armor is a terrifying ordeal, but pure, unfiltered vulnerability is the sharpest blade a person can ever choose to wield. Era speaks until her throat bleeds with emotion, and then she digs deeper. Staring dead into the black void of the lens, she violently rejects their narrative. She is not crazy. Adrian stayed because he was addicted to the sick thrill of his double life. You and I have probably felt that terrifying rush of breaking free when screaming the truth finally outweighs the fear. She drags her sister into the light, exposing the desperate lies fed to the tabloids. Era is done playing the quiet martyr. Off camera, Nadia softly asks why she put her faith in a dangerous man like Lucian. Era takes a ragged breath, because he was the only soul in that ballroom who refused to lie to me. True loyalty is never handed out. It is strictly earned while the rest of the world is busy spinning lies. Watch closely as Era finally steps into her absolute power. The framing is tight as she tells the camera how the elite Beaumont family spent 10 years painting Lucian as a cold-blooded monster. Yet, when her own life detonated inside that ballroom, the true monsters were the ones holding the brushes. Nadia kills the feed, her hands visibly shaking as she whispers about the magnitude of the moment. The second the red light dies, the adrenaline abandons Era. She collapses onto the sofa, trapping her violently trembling hands beneath her thighs to hide the physical crash. From the pitch-black corner of the room, Lucian asks when the war begins. 5 o'clock tonight. It is a bitter pill to swallow, but hitting rock bottom is the only way to clearly see the faces of those who pushed you. Nadia works the phone like a weapon, cashing in every favor to ensure the footage hijacks the 5 o'clock news cycle. A shadow of approval crosses Lucian's stoic face. But then the audio in the room seems to drop out. Nadia reads a fresh tabloid update, and the temperature plummets. It was not just the sister leaking venom. Buried in the article, a faceless source detailed Era's childhood mental struggles. The floor vanishes beneath Era's feet. Her lungs freeze. She demands a name, her voice cracking. The leaked memories were impossibly private, dark secrets locked behind closed doors. We must never forget this tragic reality. The most fatal knife wounds always come from family. because they spent decades studying the exact location of your beating heart. Era literally suffocates on the foul stench of betrayal. Someone carrying her own blood sold her to the slaughterhouse. Lucian glides into her line of sight, a massive, unmovable anchor in her spiraling panic. His deep voice cuts the noise. Who knew you were arriving? Era shakes her head frantically. Everyone. But Lucian leans closer, forcing her memory to rewind. Who was standing by the exit when you fled? She squeezes her eyes shut. The cinematic playback begins. The blurred staircase, the gasping crowd. Then the frame freezes. A flash of pale green silk melting into the servant corridors. Aunt Delia, her mother's own sister. It forces us to swallow a bitter pill. Shared blood is nothing but a biological accident. Real loyalty requires proof, not just a shared last name. The physical horror sinks deep into the marrow of Ira's bones. Her own aunt watched her hemorrhage in that grand ballroom and simply took notes. When Lucian asks for the motive, the ugly truth spills out. A 20-year vendetta over a meaningless inheritance. Delia had waited 2 decades just to inflict this humiliation upon Era's mother. Era stares blankly, visualizing her family lining up with loaded rifles. Lucian does not blink, calmly swearing to become her shield. By the door, Nadia finally wraps her in a tight embrace. But Era is entirely hollow inside. Stick with me here, because this is the darkest part of the human psyche. When a betrayal slices deeply enough into your soul, the crying stops completely. You turn to ice, and you prepare for a massacre. Era grips Nadia's jacket a fraction too long, desperate to absorb the final ounce of warmth in her freezing universe. The heavy door clicks shut, echoing like a gunshot. Left alone, Era stares at nothing. From the shadows, Lucian studies her with the intense, protective gaze of a guardian watching over ruins. She whispers that she needs a shower to wash the grime away. Take 2, he murmurs back, fully recognizing the bloodbath scheduled for this afternoon. Downstairs, the venomous Margot Beaumont deploys her circus. 3 vicious attorneys, a silent priest, and a paid-off senator storm the lobby, demanding access. It leaves us with a critical truth. A boundary is completely worthless unless you possess the iron spine to enforce it when the devil finally knocks on your front door. The camera pans across a cold, sterile room. The priest stands there like a breathing monument to guilt, while lawyers grip their shiny cease and desist orders. But Lucian's manager simply turns them away with a dismissive wave. The lighting shifts. By 1 o'clock, Margot's legal hounds change angles, trying to freeze Lucian Sliam's wealth by branding him unstable. Here is the twist, and you and I must watch this closely. 15 minutes later, Lucian's team counters, demanding buried files from a very specific 2017 meeting. Margot panics, dropping her motion instantly. A flawless checkmate. Lucian's lips curve into a shadow of a smile in the monitor's glow. We learn quickly that the first strike in any war is never meant to kill. It is merely a quiet test to see exactly how hard you will swing back. The camera pushes tight on Lucian. Now she knows what I can do, he states, his voice a heavy rumble. But Era's eyes reflect a different fire. The wedding, she whispers. She demands it tonight. Before the broadcast airs, she needs to be his wife by 5 o'clock. Lucian casts a long shadow, warning her they only met yesterday. A signature chains her to his violent world. Era does not flinch. That is the point. She fires back. Without his name, Margot will destroy her in days. The silence between them is suffocating, heavy with tragic consequence. True survival often requires us to set fire to our own escape ships. We only find our real strength when we leave ourselves absolutely no room to retreat when the storm finally breaks. The cold light catches Era's sharp features as she lays out her plan. Margot will dismiss the engagement as a stunt, but a courthouse signature is ironclad. Era is playing high-level chess now, securing spousal privilege and absolute courtroom rights. Lucian stares, the deep lines around his eyes softening in awe of her ruthless logic. He asks who taught her to think like a mastermind. Your mother, she replies, the ghosts of 2 agonizing years of psychological torture flickering in her gaze. Lucian lets out a raw, startled laugh, a rare sound breaking the heavy gloom. He locks his dark eyes with hers, promising to meet at City Hall at 4 o'clock. The deep tragedy of life is that the absolute most powerful weapons we carry are the brutal survival skills forced upon us by our worst enemies. Let us look at this scene together, piece by piece. Lucian gaze 1 instruction before reaching the dim City Hall, where Red, the sweaty judge, drowning in underworld debts, rushes the vows. Era stands bathed in dusty light, wearing a breathtaking crimson dress, the very color her ex despised. Lucian wears the same dark suit from their shattered engagement. Nadia watches from the shadows next to Thomas, whose gentle eyes contrast his violently ruined knuckles. There is no kiss here, just cold, vast distance. As the black ink dries, Era officially becomes a Beaumont. She turns to the man she married twice in 24 hours, whispering that it is finished. Reclaiming your stolen power always begins with proudly wearing the exact things your abusers desperately told you to hide. The camera holds on Era's unblinking stare. The aftermath of profound trauma rarely begins with tears. It begins in freezing silence. She confesses she feels nothing. Lucian watches her, his posture rigid. Speaking like a man entirely too familiar with the grim aftermath of violence, he quietly explains that shock is the only thing keeping her spine straight. The agonizing emotions will arrive later. Then, at 5 o'clock, the interview drops with earth-shattering force. Within minutes, 500,000 screens light up with her face. A tidal wave of support forces major news networks to cut their normal broadcasts. It is a cinematic display of karma. The truth has a beautiful way of breaking through the strongest fortresses, entirely drowning the arrogant fools who believed they were untouchable. Notice how fast a fragile ego shatters under a blinding spotlight. The lens cuts to Adrian, completely losing his grip on reality. Cornered by a reporter outside his glass empire, he throws a wild, desperate punch on live television. By 7 o'clock, his pathetic meltdown is the most watched footage on Earth. Back in the shadowy quiet of the penthouse, the air feels thick. Era curls into the sofa, her pale hands trembling around a bowl of noodles. She has not eaten in days, but Lucian used his quiet authority just to make her hold it. She whispers, stunned, that Adrian actually hit someone camera. Lucian just nods, letting the violent reality sink into her bones. People will always expose their true colors. When the fire burns hot enough, it melts away even the most expensive, carefully crafted masks. Era pushes the bowl away, exhaustion carving deep shadows into her face. She mutters that this scandal will ruin Adrian, and his ruthless mother will put the target entirely on her back. Lucian offers a grim, barely visible nod. Then, Era finally asks the agonizing question she has been choking on. Will this family actually kill over hidden offshore money? Lucian holds her terrified gaze, the ambient light reflecting in his dark eyes, and bluntly says yes. When she asks how bad it can get, he lowers his hands. He confesses his own mother orchestrated 2 fatal, blood-soaked accidents for workers who simply knew too much. The temperature in the room plummets. In the hollow chase for absolute power, Some people will gladly trade their souls to leave a trail of quiet graves behind them. Stick with me here, because this is where the world tilts. Lucian's voice drops to a grave rumble, calling those old, fatal accidents entirely too convenient. Era freezes, the suffocating reality of her new life wrapping around her throat. The crime boss steps closer, casting a heavy shadow, and lays down absolute survival rules. From this second, she ignores her phone, and she never walks outside alone. She touches no unverified packages. If a stranger approaches, she runs. He holds her trembling gaze, demanding to know if she grasps the lethal danger hanging over them. She offers a shaky, breathless yes. He reveals Tomas is already securing the lobby, with armed backup arriving by dawn. True security is never just a locked door. It is deeply respecting exactly how far a monster will go to destroy you. The light catches the tension in Lucian's jaw as he promises she will not notice the armed security team. Era realizes, with a cold shiver, that he mobilized a private army for her. Lucian corrects her gently. It is for them. Before today, he only guarded his own life. Now she is his wife, and his sociopathic mother knows exactly where his weakness lies. Era stares at her loose platinum ring, the heavy symbol of their tragic bargain. Her defensive armor finally shatters. She asks, her voice breaking, if being terrified makes her a coward. For the first time, the stone in Lucian's face crumbles. He whispers, no, it just makes her human. The truly terrifying monsters are the men who feel nothing at all. Admitting your deepest fear is never a weakness. It is simply the raw, beating heart of true courage. The past is a ghost that refuses to rest. Era has been ignoring her phone, but a sharp vibration shatters the silence of the room. An unknown number delivers a chilling command. Check your old inbox. The camera catches the sheer panic draining the blood from Era's cheeks. Lucian's posture snaps rigid, like a soldier sensing an ambush. He demands to know what it is. Era shakily turns the glowing screen toward him. It points to a dead email address from 3 years ago, long before Adrian's golden cage. Her hands violently tremble as she pries open her laptop, failing the password twice in her dread. Amidst the digital graveyard, one unread message sits waiting to explode their world. The things we try to bury never actually die. They simply wait in the shadows for the absolute worst moment to finally pull us under. The glowing screen illuminates Era's terrified face. At the top of the inbox sits a message from a ghost address. No subject, just a single file resting on the screen like an unpinned grenade. Era's finger hovers, then clicks. The instant her eyes track the first sentence, a broken gasp tears from her throat. Lucian is beside her in a blur of motion. She whispers, her voice hollow, that he needs to see this. As the crime boss reads over her trembling shoulder, his body goes completely rigid. Era asks, fighting tears, if this is the ultimate proof. Lucian breathes a heavy, devastating yes. It is a graveyard of systemic fraud, offshore money, forged invoices, and his mother's condemning signatures. The darkest secrets we hide always find the light, because the truth is an absolutely relentless hunter. You and I are going to look at this together because the betrayal is profound. The documents paint a grotesque picture of arrogance, showing Adrian and Margot discussing financial crimes as casually as ordering coffee. But Lucian bypasses the obvious guilt. He zeroes in on the true danger, instructing Era to check the sender. She scrolls up, tracing the bizarre digital footprint. Her voice is a hollow phantom when she asks who leaked it. The silence that fills the room is suffocating, thick with the scent of impending war. Lucian finally shatters the quiet, his voice dead. It is an inside job. Someone within his own walls is burning the empire to ash. Ira begs for a name, but Lucian stares into the void, refusing to guess blindly. The deepest wounds always come from the knives held by the people standing right beside us. The heavy, suffocating silence of the room presses against Lucian's shoulders as he stares into the middle distance. In his dark eyes, you can almost see the reflection of a crumbling empire. His jaw clenches, running a dangerous calculus in his mind. When he finally speaks, the absolute ice in his voice shatters the quiet. A leak of this magnitude, he murmurs, demands close proximity. It points to a phantom living in his mother's shadow, breathing her air, holding the keys to her buried ledgers. A sleeper agent wrapped in total trust. We often seek shelter in the very people holding the blade. Era leans in, her voice trembling, demanding a name. A jagged sigh escapes Lucian's chest. Only 3 people fit: the lawyer, the veteran assistant, and Ivy, his own half-sister. Era shakes her head, violently refusing the accusation. She snaps back that Ivy swore to stay out of their family bloodshed. Lucian raises a hand, desperate to shield his sister. Frustrated, Era shoves the laptop across the desk. The harsh blue screen paints Lucian's pale face in cold, unforgiving shadows. Who else could bury his mother in federal prison for decades, she demands. But the audio drops out of Lucian's world. He sits entirely frozen. His eyes are deadlocked on a digital signature from 2018. The sweeping ink does not belong to his mother. It is the exact handwriting of a ghost. His throat tightens. The dead rarely stay buried. He whispers into the glow. Our darkest secrets only sleep in the shadows, patiently waiting for their hour to finally strike. His voice empties out completely, leaving a terrifying quiet that sucks the oxygen from the room. That is my father's signature, he breathes. Ira softly reminds him that his father died in 2017. Slowly, Lucian lifts his gaze. We see the utter devastation in his eyes, a man whose reality has just turned to ash. His father was in the ground for a full year when this file was signed. For 9 years, his own blood forged a dead man's name to prop up their empire. It is a bitter lesson. The most beautiful masks often hide the ugliest deceptions. Cut to the opposite end of the sprawling city. A mysterious woman in a pitch-black office snaps her laptop shut. She steps to the high window, staring blindly out into the weeping night rain, watching the fallout. Begin. Let us look at this tragedy together. Picture Margot Beaumont, the ice-blooded architect of this syndicate. She watches her youngest son get violently shoved into a cruiser on live television. Blood drips from his lip, blood brazen. Yet Margot sits there with a sickening smirk. To her, a son is merely a pawn to be sacrificed for the throne. But the real storm gathers back at the apartment. Lucian is operating on pure vengeance. Era wakes in the dark, trembling at the harsh glare from his office. By dawn, he has weaponized 341 pages of evidence, firing them off to servers across 3 continents. The lesson here is inescapable. Never anchor your soul to a toxic empire. When survival is on the line, loyalty is nothing but a fragile illusion meant to keep you quiet. It is 5:47 in the morning. Lucian sits in the pale light, mapping out a brutal safety net over bitter coffee. He tells Ira that to eliminate them, hitmen must first erase 4 lawyers across 4 different time zones. Ira is trembling so violently she cannot lift her mug. She simply grips the ceramic crushed by the gravity of his vendetta. Then, her voice breaking, she asks the defining question. Did his father actually die of a heart attack? The resulting silence is heavy enough to fracture bone. Lucian lowers his eyes. He admits he swallowed that lie for 9 years. But if the family seal was forged, the murderer lived inside their house. It is a terrifying truth. The monsters we check under the bed for are usually the very people serving us dinner. A grim resolve settles over Lucian's face. He's choking down his mother's poisonous lies, ready to burn her syndicate to the studs. Era forgets to breathe. The reality instantly shifts from corporate treason to a blood-soaked family war. She paces the floor, terrified they are just sitting ducks waiting for a hit squad. What is the next move? She demands. Lucian looks up, his expression terrifyingly calm. They are meeting the Federal Bureau of Investigation at 11 o'clock sharp. He made the play in the dead of night while his mother slept. The takeaway is profound. When your entire world turns to ash, panic is your deadliest enemy. Take a slow breath, build an ironclad plan, and strike the fatal blow before your enemy even opens their eyes. Notice his brilliant strategy. Lucian pulled a wild card, a federal agent who has spent 6 agonizing years hunting Margot. They are handing over the vault today entirely off the grid. Era grips the marble counter, her knuckles white. Are we truly pulling the trigger? She asks. Lucian's eyes soften. He whispers that she does not have to burn in this fire with him. But Era stands tall. Do not insult my intelligence. She fires back, welding her fate to his. A rare ghost of a smirk touches Lucian's lips. Just as they head for the door at 9:47, Era's phone shatters the quiet. Her mother is calling. True power is never built on dirty wealth or fear. It is found entirely in those rare souls who willingly walk into the storm by your side. Era answers, holding the phone away as her mother hysterically shrieks about the sudden marriage. The camera pushes in on Era's face. She is a statue of pure ice. Cutting through the noise, she states she knows the ugly truth. Her parents do not care if she lives or dies. They only mourn their fragile public image. They are weeping over stock prices and failing corporate mergers instead of their daughter's physical safety. Then, Era strikes the fatal blow. She softly asks if her mother knew Aunt Delia sold her darkest secrets to the tabloids. The line goes horribly, suffocatingly dead. Here is a brutal truth you and I need to remember. A person's absolute silence in the face of a massive accusation is often the loudest, most damning confession they will ever make. That hollow silence cements the tragedy. Era's own mother knew about the vicious tabloid leak, sacrificing her child to protect their corporate bloodline. Her mother finally stammers, peddling a pathetic excuse about family wealth. It is a grotesque betrayal, letting your sister brand your daughter insane on national television, right after her fiancé's wretched affair. The camera captures Era's absolute detachment. Her voice drops an octave, freezing the air. She orders her mother to shut her mouth, promising to vanish completely into the dark. Remember this lesson. When toxic people try to justify burning your life to the ground for their own selfish gain, do not debate them. You simply sever the infected cord and walk away without a single glance back. Her mother's desperate whining bleeds through the speaker, but Era is now untouchable. She systematically dissects the woman's sins. Devoid of warmth, she states that her mother chose a rotting merger over her own bleeding daughter. She knew Adrian was a monster, yet faked a mother's pity, while secretly dialing brokers to salvage the stock price. Era drops a cold goodbye and permanently blocks the number. The screen goes black. Sitting on the edge of the bed, the phone heavy in her palm, her eyes remain dry. This bloodline will not extract one more tear from her soul. There is profound poetry in this moment. Eventually, you must stop weeping for the people holding the knife and dedicate yourself entirely to surviving the bitter war they forced upon you. Lucian's soft knock breaks the silence. Are you ready for war? He asks. Era's gaze lifts, sharp and unyielding. She is locked in. Cut to a bleak federal office on the 42nd floor. Enter Agent Marisol Vega, a hardened prosecutor who wears her authority like a weapon. For an hour, her face is a stone wall. But upon reaching page 87 of the master file, a low whistle escapes her lips. She raises her head, piercing Lucien with a dead stare. Does he truly comprehend the radioactive fallout of the bomb he just armed? She vows to put his mother in handcuffs before the week ends. Here is the vital lesson. When it is time to burn a toxic bridge, a simple match is never enough. You bring the heaviest artillery you can carry, and you reduce the rotting structure to white ash. Picture the tension in that room. Lucien radiates a graveyard calm that would unnerve a seasoned killer. When Vega questions his readiness for the fallout, he leans forward. "Why else would I hand you the blade?" he murmurs. Vega attempts to rattle him, invoking the corrupt board and the ghost of his murdered father. A single forged signature is about to tear a criminal empire at its seams. But Lucien simply delivers a bone-chilling warning. His mother has never learned how to lose. If she smells this betrayal, she will summon a tidal wave of untraceable violence. The tragic lesson is clear. Society teaches us that family is our ultimate safe harbor. Yet sometimes, the people sharing your exact bloodline are the most destructive, merciless storm you will ever have to survive. The stark overhead lights cast tragic shadows across the room. Vega leans forward, her eyes locking onto Era with an unrelenting focus. She demands to know if the wife is secure. Lucien answers from the dark corner, his voice heavy with crushing guilt. He realizes he has pulled an innocent woman into a blood-soaked syndicate war. Vega shifts her gaze to Era, delivering a merciless truth. Testifying paints a permanent target on her back for the next 18 months. Era lifts her chin, desperately projecting an unbreakable confidence. Vega strips that illusion away instantly, warning that the real terror hits 6 months later. When the silence finally suffocates you, it is agonizingly simple. Playing the hero on day one costs nothing, but true resilience is only proven when the consequences actually show up to tear down your front door. Era holds the veteran agent's stare, the air growing thick. She finally unloads the tragic script of her past. Her fiancé shared a bed with her own sister. Her mother traded her peace for a business contract. Her aunt auctioned her trauma to the press. She married a complete stranger just to keep her spirit from dying. Pointing a trembling finger at Lucien, she declares he is the only one who has not lied to her. Vega watches in silence, studying the unhinged fire in Era's eyes as she vows to lock her toxic family in a cage. For the very first time, a small smile breaks across Vega's hardened face. Let us examine this scene together. When the people you love most burn your world to ashes, the bitter wreckage they leave behind forces you to forge a completely unbreakable spine. The camera follows them into the damp night, capturing the moment absolute paranoia takes control. Vega notes that Lucien found the perfect bride, and he nods silently as they slip through a rusted iron door into a waiting sedan. The shadows inside swallow them whole. Lucien dictates the brutal laws of survival. Never use the same car or route twice. In the pitch-black back seat, Era whispers that just yesterday she was shopping for shoes. Lucien lets out a heavy, exhausted laugh, admitting that feeling utterly insane is the only sane response to this nightmare. She smiles softly, calling the madness romantic. Look at the quiet tragedy here. True romance is never found in grand gestures. It is finding the one person who will sit beside you in the dark while the world burns down. Lucien urges her to keep the dark humor alive. To him, those bitter jokes prove she has not shattered completely. His eyes remain locked on his glowing screen, but for a fraction of a second, the violent tension in his jaw softens. For a man who rules the underworld, that slight physical shift is a breathtaking display of intimacy. Era presses him about the leaked document. He confesses his legal team is searching globally, finding absolutely nothing. The traitor bounced the signal across borders, leaving only one deliberate digital fingerprint from years ago. You must understand how dangerous this is. The deadliest traps in life are never hidden in the shadows. They are the ones that leave a perfectly lit path, quietly inviting you to walk straight into your own ruin. Lucian knows this leak is a calculated strike. The enemy sat on this explosive file for years, waiting for the exact second Lucian secured his throne by marrying Era. He admits that until this weekend, he was merely a ghost. Era handed him a brilliant spotlight and a flawless alibi. The moment they left the ballroom, their rivals knew the slaughter had begun. A freezing wave of dread washes over Era's face as the realization hits. The traitor was breathing the exact same air as them at the reception. Lucian slowly nods, his eyes hollow as he confesses he only trusts 4 souls on Earth. We have all been blinded by this at some point. A massive circle of friends is often a fatal illusion. True trust is a heavily guarded fortress, and you simply cannot let just anyone walk inside. Lucian names the 4 pillars of his empire. Tomas was at the event and remains fiercely loyal, while the others were miles away. The camera focuses on Era as she connects the horrifying dots. The sender possesses a decade of syndicate secrets and enough venom to destroy his family. The traitor was hiding in plain sight. Era barely breathes her sister's name, the word Cleo, dropping into the heavy air like a death sentence. Lucian lets the suffocating silence linger. He admits he has agonized over that exact theory for hours. His foolish brother leaked secrets, handing Cleo 8 months to hoard lethal ammunition. We constantly search for monsters in the dark, forgetting the most painful truth. Total ruin usually wears a familiar face, sleeping quietly right down the hall from you. Lucian paints a savage portrait of the betrayal. Cleo spent 8 months dropping timed questions, bleeding his brother for syndicate secrets. Era desperately defends her sister, clinging to the illusion that Cleo is just a naive student. Lucian shatters that excuse without blinking. He reminds her that Cleo orchestrated a brutal media ambush, weaponizing their own blood. That is not a panicked girl. That is a cold predator moving chess pieces. Era stares out the dark window, broken, whispering that she was played from the start. Lucian's voice drops to a grave rumble. Notice how irreversible this feels. The most devastating wounds never come from a stranger out in the street. They come from the patient, quiet calculation of the exact people who claim to love us unconditional. Ye, you and I have to watch closely here, you noticing how Lucian refuses to soften the blow. He breaks down Cleo's vicious campaign to dismantle Era's life. That cheating fiancé was just phase one of a toxic cycle. If Era had walked down the aisle, Cleo would have been smiling in her dress, waiting for the divorce to steal the crown. Era trembles, asking why her sister leaked the file tonight. Lucian offers a dark smirk. It is because Era ruined the perfect script. She fought back instead of fading away quietly. In 90 seconds, Era flipped the entire board. Think about what that means for your own life. When you refuse to play the helpless victim in someone else's toxic narrative, you strip away their power and drag the true villain directly into the unforgiving daylight. Lucian takes a heavy breath, dissecting the psychology of a cornered animal. Cleo is flying blind, improvising out of sheer panic. Leaking that file was a desperate attempt to save her own skin. She is willing to burn a 90-year-old mafia empire to ashes, just so she will not be caught holding the match. Era is struck by a paralyzing realization. If her sister will destroy a dynasty, there is absolutely no ceiling to her madness. When Era asks for their next move, Lucian presents a brutal choice. They have a tiny window to frame Cleo as a helpless witness, securing her probation. This is the ultimate tragic choice. The heaviest burden we carry is having the power to destroy those who broke us, while knowing that offering them mercy might be the exact thing that guarantees our death. Lucian places a ruthless 48-hour timer on her decision. He can make a single phone call to let Cleo keep her pristine life. But the second that window slams shut, her sister will sink into the abyss with their enemies. Era is crushed by the weight of old memories. She pictures a 7-year-old Cleo crying on a bus and a teenage Cleo sobbing over a broken heart. But those soft fragments violently collide with the toxic reality of the present. The flash of that emerald dress, the calculated giggle, the ruthless media interview. For 24 years, Era acted as the ultimate human shield. We all face this breaking point eventually. You cannot keep setting your own soul on fire just to provide warmth for the toxic people who constantly plot your downfall in the shadows. Era's mind flashes to the silent vow she made at the top of that staircase. She is done playing the passive victim in her own tragic story. A single word drops from her lips, carrying the heavy finality of a judge's gavel. No. Lucian watches her closely, asking if she is certain. Her energy is pure, unfiltered ice. Cleo made a calculated choice to assassinate her trust over 8 grueling months. Era looks the crime boss dead in the eyes and commands him to let the window of mercy close forever. She delivers a chilling warning. If he ever goes behind her back to save Cleo, their alliance is finished. The reality of survival is bitter. Forgiveness is beautiful on paper, but surviving often requires letting the blade fall on those who spent months sharpening it against your neck. Era commands the space like an equal, demanding if Lucian respects her boundary. The crime boss studies her hardened transformation before offering a solemn nod. The rest of the drive is swallowed by a thick silence. When the sedan stops, Thomas pulls the door open, and Era steps into the freezing air. But before Lucian can follow, a primal survival instinct kicks in. We all know that icy prickle on the back of the neck, warning a predator is hunting. Across the street, a man in a grey coat pretends to look at his phone, but his dead eyes are locked on Era. He smirks, presses a gloved finger to his lips, and fades into the shadows. Let this sink in. When the worst monsters step out of the dark and into the streetlights to say hello, you realize the true war has only just begun. You and I need to look closely at this scene. Pure psychological terror has a specific frequency, crashing into you without a sound. For Era, it is the suffocating silence of the marble lobby as she begs Lucian not to look behind them. He does not flinch. He grips her arm, shoving her into the elevator. The second those steel doors seal shut, he demands the intel. She describes the phantom, a grey coat, 50 years old, short hair. But the detail that changes the game? A pale chin scar shaped exactly like a fish hook. Lucian's stoic face instantly drains of all color. It leaves us with a profound lesson. You can build the thickest armor imaginable, but life will always find the one highly specific detail required to bypass your walls and completely shatter your peace of mind. Grasp the psychological nightmare of what Lucian reveals next. His voice grates like crushed glass as he confesses the stalker works directly for his mother. This man is a specialist she has not unleashed in 12 years. The last time she did, a body went into the ground. The matriarch is done playing legal chess. That scarred phantom is not an investigator. He is the Grim Reaper called in when negotiations die. The elevator chimes at the penthouse, opening to quiet horror. Their fortified safe house, swept just 5 hours ago, is completely compromised. Resting perfectly dead center on the dark kitchen island is a crisp white envelope. It proves a chilling life lesson. The deepest, most lethal cuts in this world will always be delivered by the hands of your own blood. Let us observe the architecture of a perfect trap. Era spots her name on that envelope, written in the unmistakable handwriting of her sister. Before she can reach out, Lucian blocks her, his arm snapping up like a steel barrier. He warns her not to touch a single thing. Notice how he avoids calling the police or his security team. Instead, he dials one specific number, waits half a ring, and delivers 4 chilling words. She is inside the walls. He hangs up instantly. Era stands completely frozen, her lungs forgetting how to work, surrounded by the sprawling luxury of the penthouse, staring at a ghost from her past. Cold dread climbs her spine. It brings a harsh truth we all eventually learn. The people we hold most dear are often the exact weapons our enemies choose to destroy us. Lucian drops his voice to a grave whisper, ordering Era to step back and remain totally silent. Moving with terrifying calm, he uses a gloved hand to gently pull the door shut. It makes you wonder how many years he spent preparing for this exact moment. He guides her past the glowing elevators, pushing her towards a hidden stairwell she never knew existed. Sometimes in life, the only way to move forward is to step blindly into the dark. They descend 42 agonizing flights of stairs. By the time their shoes hit the concrete floor, Era's legs are shaking so violently she has to grip the metal rail just to stand. Down in the dim service garage, Thomas is waiting with a swapped getaway car. Lucian pulls the heavy door open, and Era scrambles into the pitch-black safety of the back seat. Let us examine the true nature of panic. It completely strips away your voice, proving just how rarely we actually control our own fate. Era is so paralyzed, she cannot even force her mouth to ask where they are fleeing. Lucian warns Thomas his sister was in the apartment, but Thomas is already steps ahead. A system override was logged at 2:17, triggered by a scan from his mother's chief of security. A man walked in, left the envelope, and vanished in exactly 41 seconds. When Lucian fiercely demands to know how they bypassed the building access, the revelation is staggering. Thomas calmly reveals that 9 weeks ago, Lucian's mother quietly purchased the entire property. The vicious matriarch literally owned the walls surrounding them while they slept. Timing is a cruel architect. The past often catches up the exact second you feel safe. The timeline here is the most disturbing puzzle piece. 9 weeks ago, Lucian repeats it out loud, his mind racing. Back then, he and Era were not even speaking. There was no reason for his mother to buy that building, unless she was laying the foundation for a trap. From the shadows of the back seat, Era finds her trembling voice, asking what happened 9 weeks ago. Lucian slowly turns to face her, his expression grim, and reveals the crushing truth. That was the exact day his mother approved Era's doomed engagement of Adrian. The realization hits his Asia like a physical blow. The matriarch knew the relationship was a scam from the start. She built the cage long before Era ever stepped inside. Today, you and I are going to unpack the brutal nature of power. A painful truth of life is that some people will burn your entire world down just to keep their own hands warm. Lucian explains that his mother never prepares for random accidents. She only prepares for outcomes she personally designs. She never intended for Adrian to marry Era. The grand strategy was to shatter Era publicly, using that engineered trauma as a lethal weapon against her father. The matriarch wanted to trigger a humiliating scandal that would destroy his credibility, crash his stock, and force a massive sell-off. Then, the Beaumont syndicate would sweep in and buy the empire for pennies, while Adrian played the weeping ex-fiancé for the flashing cameras. It is a masterpiece of absolute calculated cruelty. As for Era, she was nothing more than collateral damage in a vicious corporate war. It teaches us a grim lesson. Trust is a fragile thing, easily shattered by the exact hands meant to protect it. Lucian spells out her intended fate. She was supposed to be pushed into a psychiatric ward, heavily medicated, and locked away for years. As the horror sinks in, Era realizes her own parents would have signed the papers just to save face. She remembers her mother's freezing phone call from that morning. At first, Era feels a burning heat behind her eyes, assuming it is grief for the fake life she lost. But that sadness instantly hardens into pure, absolute rage. When she speaks, her voice is unrecognizable. Stripped of all warmth, she looks dead at Lucian and swears she will destroy his mother. Era is not simply venting. She is forging a solemn vow. There is a defining moment in life where deep sorrow hardens into absolute resolve, and there is zero going back. She stares at Lucian through the dark and lays out her terms. No probation, no plea deals, no quiet payouts. She wants that wicked woman to rot in a federal prison cell. Without missing a beat, Lucian agrees. The car slips into a hidden garage. Tomas passes a secure keycard to Lucian, who presses it into Era's hand. He lays down the rules. 3rd floor, apartment 3C. She must open that door for no one except him or Tomas. Use the burner phone, and do not even think about opening a window. When she panics, asking where he is going, his answer carries a dark weight. He has to go back to the penthouse to open that envelope. Era tries to reason with him, insisting the envelope clearly has her name on it. But here is a profound lesson about toxic manipulators. Their gifts are never given freely. They are always a ruthless psychological test. Lucian understands his mother's twisted mind better than anyone. That letter was never meant for Era. It was a calculated trap to see exactly how he would react under pressure. Panic bleeds into Era's voice as she asks what happens if it is an explosive. Lucian remains terrifyingly calm. He tells her if it were a bomb, they would already be dead. It is a message, and he must read it before his mother makes her next move. Era begs him not to leave her alone. He stares at her in the heavy silence. Then, the ruthless Lucian Beaumont softens, gently resting his hand against her cheek. He looks deep into her eyes and makes a quiet promise. Real loyalty is never proven in moments of peace, but in the chaotic spaces where everything is on the line. He is coming back. A man does not wait 9 grueling years to dismantle his mother's empire, only to surrender to a piece of paper. He orders her to wait, eat, and remain hidden. Soon, they will finish this cycle of vengeance together. Era is left entirely stripped of words. He presses a firm kiss to her forehead and vanishes into the shadows. Tomas drives her to the safe house, leaving Era alone with the deafening sound of her own heartbeat. She spends the next 2 hours and 40 minutes sitting on the edge of an unfamiliar couch, gripping the burner phone, absolutely refusing to look away from the heavy front door. At the 2-hour and 41-minute mark, the silence shatters. You and I, the hardest lessons, drop the exact second we let our guard down. The burner phone rings and Era snatches it up instantly. It is Lucian. His voice is steady, confirming he is safe. But when she asks what was inside that envelope, a suffocating pause stretches across the line. Finally, he reveals the truth. It was a photograph. Not a threat, but a snapshot of Era at 14 years old, standing at a summer camp in a yellow shirt. Beside her, with Era's arm draped over her shoulders, is Lucian's sister, Ivy. Era's breath catches in her chest. She stumbles over her words, swearing she never knew anyone from his family. Lucian softly, tragically replies that, yes, she absolutely did. The camera lingers on Era's trembling hands. Memory is a fragile thing. We forget the stones we toss into the water, blind to the massive ripples they create. Lucian gently guides her back to reality. She had known the girl for just 8 days as Ivy M., unaware of the dark syndicate she belonged to. They exchanged only 2 letters, which Lucian found hidden in his sister's room. The realization hits Era with paralyzing force. Lucian's mother, a woman who leaves nothing to chance, had been watching her since she was 14. She meticulously tracked Era for 12 long years, simply because a young girl showed mercy to a half-sister the matriarch despised. It serves as a quiet reminder for us all. The smallest act of kindness can echo through time, altering our destinies forever. The crushing weight of this betrayal steals the air from Era's lungs. Every moment with Adrian was a cage built by a ruthless mother harboring a decade-old grudge. Desperation claws at Era's throat as she begs Lucian to return. 22 agonizing minutes tick by before the heavy door groans inward. Era bolts upright, walking directly into the unyielding wall of his chest. She does not shed a tear, anchoring herself to him with a fierce grip. And Lucian, a hardened man carved from ice who swears he lacks warmth, wraps his arms around her and holds on just as desperately. They stand perfectly still, weathering the storm together. We all learn this truth eventually. My true safety is never found behind locked doors, but in the arms of someone who refuses to leave when your world catches fire. Let us step closer and look at this together, because the quietest moments in a crime syndicate always conceal the sharpest blades. Era sits there, entirely hollowed out, brushing away a stray tear as she asks what could possibly happen next. The answer arrives at 6 in the morning. Agent Vega is moving in to spring a trap on Lucian's own mother, his brother, and even Era's sister. But the vicious cycle of violence always throws a wild card. Ivy, Lucian's estranged sister, sees the breaking news and immediately boards a flight. He begged her to stay away from this toxic family war, but she runs straight into the roaring flames anyway. It shows us something deeply profound about human nature. The people we try the hardest to shield are often the very first ones to risk absolutely everything to save us. Era lets out a broken, exhausted laugh that echoes in the quiet room. It is the first time in 3 brutal days of psychological warfare she sounds remotely human. She murmurs that his sister sounds like a force of nature. Hearing this, the camera catches a slight shift in Lucian. Lucian, a man who survived the freezing, emotional wasteland of the mob, simply drops his heavy armor. He quietly admits Ivy is the only relative who loved him without a hidden motive. By 9:47 that evening, Ivy stands framed in the doorway. She carries their mother's sharp features but their father's tragically soft eyes. She drops a casual greeting before pulling Era into a deep, silent embrace. It is a powerful reminder. True family is never just about bloodlines. It is about the rare souls who hold your broken pieces together when the world tries to destroy you. Era leans into the warm embrace, whispering that she remembers her. The grim irony is that Ivy already knows their mother kept a twisted stalker file on Era. Lucian paces the room, laying out the endgame. They will put their mother in a federal cell, pour a drink, and watch her toxic empire burn. But Ivy did not arrive empty-handed. She drops a thin folder onto the oak desk. 23 pages. That is all it takes to dismantle a dynasty built on blood. On page 4 sits a bank transfer from Margot's private vault to an offshore account dated exactly 3 days before the crime boss died. The amount is $1.4 million. We all learn a hard truth here. No matter how deep you bury your worst sins, the crushing weight of dirty money will always carve a trail right back to your front door. Era voices the heavy question hanging over them. What was the exact price of a human life? Ivy cannot prove it yet, but the dark arithmetic is undeniable. Exactly 2 days after those funds vanished, their father collapsed from a supposed heart attack, and the doctor who signed his death certificate. He retired 6 months later, purchasing a beachfront house for exactly $1.4 million. The sheer weight of this betrayal causes Lucian to lose his footing, sinking heavily into his chair. Ivy carried this radioactive truth alone for 6 agonizing years, knowing nobody would ever believe a civilian over the untouchable Margot Beaumont. It teaches us a brutal but necessary lesson. When you are forced to fight a monster, supreme patience is often the absolute sharpest weapon you can wield in the dark. You and I have to appreciate the psychological gears shifting behind Lucian's eyes in this frame. He stares at his sister, finally grasping that she was the quiet guardian he never knew he had. He mentions the anonymous email from Sunday, the massive document leak that decimated their syndicate. But Ivy simply shakes her head, her face pale. She was in an operating room when that bomb went off. The silence that follows is thick and suffocating. Then, Lucian's phone suddenly lights up on the desk. The initial shock on his face slowly melts into a dark, understanding smile. It is the chilling expression of a man realizing his enemy just stepped onto their own hidden landmine. We see a powerful truth here. Absolute arrogance is usually the very thing that forces the most powerful players to dig their own shallow graves. The lens focuses tightly on Era, practically vibrating with raw anxiety, demanding to know what the message says. Agent Vega finally cracked the digital footprint of the massive leak. Era braces for a fatal blow, but she is unprepared for the chilling reality Lucian reveals. It was Margot Beaumont. His own mother orchestrated the destruction of her empire. Lucian's voice drops to a whisper as he unpacks the toxic machinery of her mind. She forged his father's signature on old documents, planting them like a poison seed. If her children ever tried to steal her power, she could trigger the trap and let them take the fall for her crimes. It is a deeply unsettling reality to accept, but it offers a profound lesson. Very often, the familiar hands we trust the most are the exact ones quietly sharpening the knife to press against our unprotected backs. Let's pause together and examine the chilling depravity of a parent building a cold prison for their own child. Margot designed this mechanism so Lucian would rot in a federal cell while she walked free. But when Lucian walked out on her last Saturday, she realized he was beyond her control, so she pivots without hesitation. She paints the crosshairs directly onto Adrian, her other son, offering him up as a sacrificial lamb to ensure her survival. Tomorrow morning, she fully intends to stand before the flashing cameras, weeping artificial tears as the tragic, betrayed widow. It is a terrifying, cinematic display of pure sociopathy. Deception might be a heavy mask to wear, but it teaches us something vital. Some people are so incredibly empty inside that the beautiful mask simply becomes their actual face. The scene dims as we realize Margot is preparing a tragic performance for the ages. The tension breaks when Era softly asks the inevitable question of what they do now. Lucian meets the gaze of both women, his tone shifting into a state of chilling calm. He tells them they will simply let her play her wicked hand. Then, they will offer the authorities the one fatal flaw in Margot's grand design, a living witness who was standing in the shadows the night the boss was murdered. Ivy stares at him, her voice trembling as she insists no such person exists. The room goes entirely still. Lucian absorbs a decade of buried trauma and quietly replies that he was there. It leaves us with a stark reality. You can never truly move forward in life until you turn around and stare your darkest truths directly in the eye. Try to imagine the sheer psychological torment of carrying a heavy ghost like that. Lucian explains how his father called him, sounding completely broken in the dead of night. Despite 2 years of bitter silence, Lucian drove 3 hours into the pitch black. He stood paralyzed outside the heavy office door. He heard his mother's icy voice. He heard the sickening rattle of those fatal pills. He heard his father choke out a final plea, met only by his mother's terrifying silence. For 9 agonizing years, Lucian swallowed that toxic poison. He knew without concrete evidence. Accusing a mafia matriarch of murder would sound like the ravings of a broken son. It paints a harsh, unforgiving reality. Sometimes, surviving means swallowing your burning rage until the exact moment you finally hold the hammer. But the long game is finally over. The forged documents gave investigators their undeniable paper trail. The $1.4 million payout cemented the motive. And Lucian taking the stand is the final nail in the coffin. The camera catches Era looking at him. The sheer heartbreak evident in her eyes. She reminds him of his promise to stop lying, noting he always claimed his father died naturally. Lucian slowly confesses that he had to isolate himself with this waking nightmare. His sister was safely away, and his brother was a brainwashed pawn. If he had shown even a fraction of his hand, anyone close to him would have been mercilessly eliminated. It brings us to a deeply painful understanding of sacrifice. You cannot truly protect the people you love if you recklessly pick a fight you are not fully equipped to win. The paradigm shifted last Saturday, and we are going to look at exactly how it happened. Lucian turns to Era, dropping a line of such raw vulnerability it steals the air from the room. He tells her he finally found someone worth breaking his long silence for. Refusing to cry, Era reaches across the table and grips his hand like a lifeline. Then dawn breaks. At exactly 6 in the morning, federal agents flood 6 locations. Margot is dragged from her pristine kitchen and screaming for her lawyers. Adrian is pinned down in a cheap motel, while Cleo is handcuffed in silk pajamas meant for a honeymoon she will never see. We often complain that justice takes its sweet time, but when the heavy hammer finally drops, it shatters the foundation of everything in its path. The syndicate collapses with poetic symmetry. Executives are marched into the morning air in steel cuffs, and the chief of security is tackled on an airport tarmac just before his flight to Dubai. The public is captivated by one striking image. Margot Beaumont, the untouchable architect of so much misery, doing a perp walk in her bathrobe. She offers no tears, only a venomous glare, declaring her absolute innocence. But the smoke and mirrors are gone. The trial grinds on for 11 grueling months. Lucian sits on the stand for 4 horrific days, bleeding out his deepest traumas for a silent jury to evaluate. It takes them only 3 hours to return a verdict of first-degree murder. It leaves us with one simple lesson. The cold truth will always outlast the loudest lies. The heavy gavel falls, and a fractured dynasty shatters. Margot is handed a life sentence with 0 hope of parole. Adrian, The golden boy is buried under a brutal 22-year reality. Even Cleo is locked away for 9 long years. From her cold cell, she begs for a single visit. Era responds with deafening silence, sending only a lawyer to deliver a cold rejection. Her father steps down in disgrace while her mother flees south, becoming a ghost. Era watches them vanish and does not take a single step in pursuit. You and I must recognize this hard truth. Sometimes, survival requires cutting the cord on the people who bleed you dry, walking away from the architects of your pain without looking back is never an act of surrender. It is the ultimate reclamation of your power. The silence after a war is where the true story takes root. Lucian ascends the blood-stained throne of his family syndicate. But instead of ruling with fear, he works to wash the empire clean. It takes years of grueling effort to drag a shadow organization into the light. Ivy relocates from Boston to open a children's clinic nearby. 3 years later, the scene shifts to a quiet hospital room. Lucian gently cradles his newborn daughter Magnolia. She shares Era's bright smile and her father's quiet resilience. Looking at this fragile new life, unburdened by the dark sins of his mafia past, Lucian finally lets out a real smile. The meaning here is simple but profound. Breaking a cycle of inherited trauma is the most powerful legacy a person can ever leave behind. Consider the sheer madness of this moment. When Lucian quietly thanked her for the proposal, Era let out a hollow laugh. Stripped of all pretense, she looked him in the eye and confessed the bitter truth. She only proposed because she was consumed by a need for revenge. She was hunting for a weapon, and Lucian was the sharpest blade in the room. His response was devastatingly calm. He simply said he already knew. She admitted she felt no love for him back then. He knew. Then she confessed that she truly loved him now. He knew that too. That honest exchange dissolved a 9-year mafia war over a hidden file. There is a profound lesson buried right here. When two flawed people finally drop their heavy armor, even the most toxic beginnings can forge an unbreakable bond. Let us look at the profound transformation of Era Beaumont. She first walked through those heavy ballroom doors as someone who apologized simply for existing, but the formidable figure who stepped back out into the freezing night air was entirely reborn. She would never bend her knee again. Through every bitter storm and quiet victory that followed, she refused to express a single regret. She embraced every chaotic choice that tethered her to Lucian. You and I have probably both made the mistake of shrinking ourselves to keep the peace, apologizing while we are the ones bleeding. But the moment you finally claim your scars and stop asking the world for permission to survive, you become totally untouchable. Era grabbed her true power, and she never once looked back.